Heavy cloud cover saturated western Iraq today, the precise area where many of the mobile Scuds are located. Jim Stewart, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Information on troop movements.
I said, I have the target in sight. He says, do you see the radio antennas on top of the building? I said, I have it, cleared hot, and we all dropped.
Many of the Marines cheered at the sight of the airstrikes.
Go outside, take a look, and you can see them doing their job. Very, very proud of them. It's the way to go.
I'm pretty sure that the airstrikes take out the majority of their defense, but it's always going to take ground troops to go through and sweep up.
Oh, and the Scuds come flying in. Oh, and the Scuds come flying in.
As the American troops sang their new desert hymn, the U.S. was reminding Iraq today of its obligation to give humane treatment to prisoners of war. There were also reports today that a dozen Iraqi soldiers were taken into custody by Allied forces during an attack on an Iraqi anti-aircraft battery. Meanwhile, today, the Allied forces released these dramatic pictures of a French bombing run on targets in the Gulf. At the Pentagon today, officials continue to praise the success of the Allied airstrikes and said their target now will be Iraq's elite Republican Guard.
We'll try to hammer them just as hard as we can. The campaign is orchestrated. The first objective represented certain things: command and control, air defense, air superiority. We're beginning to achieve some of that, so as the chairman said on TV, we can begin to shift the focus of the air campaign somewhat.
The Pentagon announced this afternoon that President Bush has signed orders granting the military the power to call up an additional 200,000 reservists to support Operation Desert Storm. And the Pentagon has released figures of planes down since Operation Desert Storm got underway. After calling the first 3 days a military success, the Pentagon said we have lost 6 planes now in battle. U.S. forces were able to shoot down 10 Iraqi planes, most of which were Soviet MiG-29s. All of the American crew members involved are unaccounted for at this time.
I have seen no indication of any pullout by Iraqi troops.
For the moment, the defense of Israel seems more important than the liberation of Kuwait. Today, Patriot air defense missiles and the American crews that will man them arrived in Israel. Their mission, defend Israel from Iraq's Scud missile attacks. Their objective, keep Israel from entering the war and upsetting the Arab coalition against Iraq.
All of the events surrounding Desert Storm are extraordinary, but none is more extraordinary than the fact that Israel is entrusting its defense to soldiers of another nation. Dan?
David Martin, thank you. Iraq followed up its Saturday morning missile attack on Israel with a propaganda bombardment. The missiles did do some damage and did cause some injuries. Today, the Iraqi government claimed the missiles had turned Tel Aviv into a, quote, crematorium, unquote. CBS News correspondent Tom Fenton was there when the missiles fell. He joins us now from Tel Aviv. Tom?
Dan, I'm told that the new Patriot missiles could have arrived here 10 days ago. But an argument between the U.S. and Israeli governments over whether Israel should be given the latest model and who should man them apparently held the deal up.
Let's do it and do it right.
At this hour, they're reported to be in place and operational. They haven't had anything to shoot at yet, but the night is not over. This morning, Tel Aviv was hit with a salvo of 3 rockets that did some material damage but killed no one. Casualties have been light so far, but the threat that the missiles might be carrying chemical warheads has kept this country paralyzed.
Sources here say that the new Patriots may not be enough to keep the Israeli government from striking back on its own. The government has decided to wait for a day or two to see if the missile attacks diminish, and if they don't, the Israelis may mount their own operation against Iraq, no matter what the U.S. government says. Dan?
Tom Fenton in Tel Aviv. Iraq's Deputy Chief of Mission in Washington was called to the State Department today to talk about, among other things, we're told, the treatment of prisoners of war. This was the first diplomatic contact between the United States and Iraq since the war began. Joining us now from Paris, another Iraqi diplomat, the man who speaks for Saddam Hussein in France, the ambassador to France from Iraq, Abdul Razak al-Hashimi. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Ambassador. How long are the Scud attacks on Israel going to continue, particularly keeping in mind that they're aimed at, quote, populated areas, unquote?
Well, Dan, as long as the war is going on, such a possibility is always there.
Will there be other attacks?
Well, we leave it to time, but the possibility is always there.
Mr. Ambassador, respectfully, what's the point? So many people recognize and say that these missiles are nothing but a terrorist weapon. They have only propaganda value. So what's the point?
No, Dan. The whole conflict is all along. It's been an Arab-Israeli conflict. And the plan was, as I talked about it before, that United States and whoever with her to get rid of Iraq and destroy whatever Iraq has accomplished for Israel, and Israel to stay away. This, of course, not going to be done. And everybody is talking today about Israel is not retaliating, etc. Israel has retaliated today because Israeli plane today participated in the raids that took place on Iraq today.
Is that a fact, Mr. Ambassador?
Yes, it is, and we have documents. We are going to release it later based on the military situation. They used the air bases in Saudi Arabia. They moved yesterday from Israel to the bases in Saudi Arabia, and they participated in the raids today.
We will be interested in seeing that documentation. We keep hearing about communications being tremendously disrupted in Iraq. Is that true? Have you been in touch, for example, with your government today?
I have been always been in touch with my government in different ways, but don't ask me how.
But you have been in touch with them today?
Yeah, every day.
Mr. Ambassador, when will Iraq pull out of Kuwait?
Iraq has been willing and is willing now and will be willing in the future to sit on the negotiating table to come up with a solution to all problems in the region. And we hope that the American administration will realize that sitting to the negotiating table is much better than this destruction and this madness.
It's been reported in various places, we heard it on one of our broadcasts last night, Mr. Ambassador, that Mikhail Gorbachev might be involved in some kind of back-channel peace negotiations. Is that true? Do you know anything about that?
I really don't know anything about it, Dan. I never heard of anything about it. I read it as news clips, but nothing official, really.
We don't have many seconds left, Mr. Ambassador, but both sides are now facing the real probability of casualty-inducing ground war. Isn't there a way to avoid that, to stop the war before that starts?
Yes, there is a way. That sitting to the negotiating table, Dan, it's very easy. And you see, you asked me the first question about Israel. You know, I'm not expecting you to answer me, but in what interest, on whose interest that the Palestinian issue to stay as it is, and who's against the United States interest or the European interest or the world interest for this problem to be solved? Of course, the only party that doesn't want this problem to be solved is Israel. So this is the whole issue.
Mr. Ambassador.
Let's sit to the negotiating table. Dan, it's the way out without preconditioned negotiation.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.
Iraq is now claiming to have shot down more than 140 Allied planes. The U.S. military puts the figure at 10. That includes 6 U.S. aircraft. Their crews listed officially as missing in action. Their families are, of course, the unofficial casualties of the war. Bruce Morton has their story.
Daylight and dark, they blast into the sky. Almost all of them, almost all, come back.
Obviously, we want them back. We're grieving that they're not back already, but you got to press on with the job and hope for their safe return and pray that they get back.
Jim Ovishun is talking about 2 of the missing, Air Force pilots Donnie Holland and Thomas Koritz, who fly as a team and were based here at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina.
All of us want to consider them missing in action. We want to pray and trust that the equipment has worked, they were able to bail out.
I know them both. I know they do their job well, no matter what it is. And it's sad that something like this could happen.
James Peck worked on the planes of 2 more of the missing Navy pilots Robert Wetzel and Jeff Zahn. That's Wetzel helping Peck cut a cake the day he re-enlisted. Zahn grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, a suburb of Philadelphia. Was a gymnast, not great natural skills, but lots of drive.
When he was finally done with his academic career and his gymnastics career, he excelled in both.
Neighbor Cheryl Sage has yellow ribbons on her house. She remembers Zahn as boy, not warrior.
Just as a nice little boy, not as an Air Force pilot, a tough, strong guy that he must have been to want to do this to begin with.
In Jacksonville, Florida, church services for the first pilot to go missing, the Navy's Michael Spiker. His grandmother in Iowa shows visitors a postcard he sent. I've seen the Holy Land.
But he was resigned to being there because that's the way it was. And he was not a kid shirk his duty.
All the missing so far are pilots, and at Kelly Air Force Base outside San Antonio, there's a hotline worried relatives can call.
I can tell you that he is okay, because the only Air Force casualties that we have at this time are the F-15E crew that's listed as missing and the F-4G that is down.
Reassurance, however fragile, helps. At Fort Devens, Massachusetts, another contingent shipped out today, Gulf bound. Tears and hugs, and hope that all of them, every one, will come safe home again. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
Flexibility, they have been ordered to keep casualties at a minimum. The Bush administration wanting to preserve relations with the Arab world. And yet every time the Israelis refrain from retaliating, according to administration officials, they build up enormous chits for their side for after the conflict. The president plans to stay up at Camp David through the weekend. When he's here, he can't possibly escape the anti-war demonstrators across the street and the constant pounding of drums through the night. The White House said today that President Bush does not think that the NFL playoffs tomorrow should be disrupted because of the war. He says the nation's business must continue. Life goes on. Dan?
Thanks, Leslie. Joining us now from Washington is the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Salman Shoval. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us. You perhaps heard Iraq's ambassador to France say just a few moments ago that Israeli planes participated in today's raids on Iraq and that he has the documentation to prove that. Is it true?
Well, the man must be pretty desperate. Of course it's not true. Let me say categorically, Israeli planes did not participate in this or in any other operation. We are not part of this war. And it's really ludicrous, this whole statement.
Now that the United States has committed the Patriot ground-to-air missile defense system to Israel, is the Israeli government now prepared to say categorically that it will not be striking back at Iraq on its own?
The communications between Israel and the United States government are perfect, I would say. They couldn't be better at the present time. The Israeli position has been stated very clearly. It is Israel which will decide how and when and if to respond to Iraqi attacks of the sort we have had in the last few nights. Hopefully there won't be anything tonight, but I have no assurance on that, of course. But the communications between Israel and America, and we understand, of course, that it affects both sides, are really very good. Let me add one thing. I've heard somebody say looking for those mobile missiles, launches rather, is like looking for a needle in a haystack. That's true. Israel may just have more experience in looking for needles in haystacks.
Well, now, Mr. Ambassador, that will raise in everybody's mind the belief that Israel is about to start looking for those needles in the haystack on its own. And I want to make explicitly clear what Israel's position is at the moment. You've reserved the right to do that, and you're raising the probability Israel is going to do that?
No, I'm not raising the probability at all. I'm just saying that we have the expertise and the experience, but we will certainly make the decision, if we make a decision, based upon the political situation or the military situation, the needs of Israel, of the Israeli population to be defended, and our relationship